up his trip to Kuala Lumpur after attending several meetings. He also held high-level talks with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to Chinese state media, both sides described the meeting as positive, practical and constructive. Wang Yi said he hopes the US will formulate its China policy based on peaceful coexistence and objectivity. Rubio echoed the optimism, saying President Trump and President Xi have a strong relationship. He stressed that while differences remain, including on Taiwan, there is a mutual need for engagement, and this meeting could help build momentum for future cooperation. This is what the US Secretary of State has said regarding this high-level meeting.
I think there's some areas of potential cooperation. I thought it was a very constructive, positive meeting and a lot of work to do. He's absolutely right that the president has a very good relationship with President Xi. It tracks back to his first term. And, you know, obviously there are some issues we're going to have to work through, and that's to be expected with countries of our size and scope and influence in the world, two global powers such as the United States and China. But I thought it was a very constructive and positive meeting. And the reason why I tell you there's a high probability they're going to meet is that they both want to meet. And I don't know President Xi, but I know President Trump, and you know, I can tell you that he's committed to having that meeting happen. So the reason why I think there's high odds of it happening is they both want it to happen. So I'm sure we'll work on a date and find a mutually acceptable date for both sides. And I'm pretty confident. We want it to be a good meeting, and we're going to work hard between now and whatever date that is to make sure that when that visit does happen.
Well, joining us to discuss these latest developments in a relationship between two of the world's top economies is Ross Feingold, a political analyst who is joining us from Taipei. Ross, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us today. Positive rhetoric there from Marco Rubio after a conversation, but he clearly pointed out that there are still gaps. We know situations like the current tensions with Taiwan is a key different point from both nations in their ideologies as well. Do you think this optimism that Rubio and Trump have both spoken about is rhetoric, or is there a real shift here in potential bilateral relations?
First of all, I have to say I want to watch that clip a few more times, because that's certainly not the Senator Rubio who was such a critic about China over a large number of issues, from human rights to religious freedom to Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan. But obviously it's different when you're the Secretary of State and you have to look at the relationship through a very different lens. And we see that with Rubio's meeting, and he used the words like cooperation and constructive. It sounded almost like the Biden administration talking about meetings with China. But you know, as he also indicated, it's what the boss wants. President Trump likes to say he has a good relationship with President Xi. In the last few months since he took office, President Trump has said on numerous occasions that he wants to meet with President Xi and that it's happening soon. So Rubio has to work towards that goal. And I think when we see or hear the President of the United States or Xi Jinping say that they want to meet, I think that's sincere. I think they do want to meet. I think they realize that they're not going to solve every problem in the relationship when they do meet, but I think it's a genuine desire. And let's also look at the history that every year the President of the United States and the President of China, they do normally meet once, or they have multiple video and or video calls. So there's a high likelihood that they will meet soon.
Yes, also joining us to discuss this potential developing relationship between the US and China is Dr. Noor Nawandi, a security analyst and PSYOPs expert who's joining us from Malaysia. Thank you, Dr. Nawandi, for being here with us. Of course, US-China relations, just some of the discussions that are ongoing in Kuala Lumpur for this ASEAN foreign ministers meeting. But I want to focus on that relationship just a little while longer, specifically looking at trade. We saw reciprocal tariffs that extended and continued to be exaggerated to the point where there were triple-digit rates on both China and the US reciprocally. How important for global stability and global economics is it that these top two economies in the world are aligned and together and not fighting in a bitter trade war?
I think it's important for us to recognize the reciprocal effect of the ongoing tariff war between US and China. We also developed some elements of extending effect to other countries, particularly on the ASEAN countries and as well. So these have to be looked into both elements of internalizations of the products that are having there in China and US, also on the elements that what happens in the context of ASEAN element. So if we particularly looks into the ASEAN, we are basically say the ASEANs are quite trapped in the context of the war. That's why ASEAN also have to move in the blocks of economics diplomacy. And Malaysia, for sure, for example, we move into the neutrality zone, that basically we are having lots of other potential to trade on and to look into how the effect of the tariff war and how to cushion the effect of tariff war between China and US. And significantly, we're also looking into some elements of comprehensive and trans-Pacific agreements, NCP, TPP, and also looking into other form of ASEAN's, Australia, UK cooperation to look into how this extended effect can be cushioned by ASEAN as a bloc. Nevertheless, this is something that really have to be in a watchful elements of economic progressions. And I do believe we have some significant emerging effect if this kind of war trade continues to become one of the fatal points of economics in these decades.
Yes, and Dr. Nwandi, staying with you, of course, global conflict is across continents at the moment, and the US are either directly involved or providing support, at least in rhetoric, on many conflicts that are ongoing. The Taiwan situation with China, of course, a pressing point. But looking at a US-China relationship, looking at wider conflicts, do you think that there could be alignment on views with that? We know, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has drawn a line between certain nations, China potentially falling on the other side of the line compared to the United States. How do you think this relationship could develop looking at global conflict and looking at global security in the face of uncertainty?
Basically, if we look into the global order, basically repetitions of many of that will be a second Cold War happening between China and US, although there is also some argument has been studied in some academic research, some progressions reports to look into whether there become a form of second Cold War between China and US. And this will be into amounts, because if we look into the Cold War appreciations value and depreciation value, it happens at the peaks where diplomacy become a larger threats of public diplomacy of US against the Soviets, against Russia, and of course Soviets against the US. And this also being extended to, but in the context of this new conflict, we have looked into a new form of tariff war, which will never happens between the conflicts of the last Cold War between the US and the Soviets. So this is something a little bit more interesting and significant. Interesting, not in sense it's good, but it is something that we have to be looked carefully, because the extended elements of economic, we decide the power blocks of economics in the next decades and how it will be overlaps into some other representation, such as military, such as the conflicts in Taiwan, the Ukraine, and how it will look into affected into some other elements of neutrality zone. And ASEAN, again, particularly, we are looking into on how this kind of conflict must not be able to distort any form of ASEAN progression, as what we have in Zohan in 1971, where we have a zone of peace and neutrality when ASEAN signed this Zohan, and this Zohan have made sure that ASEAN extended to make sure that the conflicts during the Cold War does not have a significant effect between these two superpowers during that particular time, namely US or Soviet towards the ASEAN continent, as what happened in the Vietnam War. So we might be seeing to there be another form of pact. Some agreements have to sign by some regional values, some blocks, particularly in the ASEAN, to ensure that if this extended conflicts of war tariff has started to enlarge into some divisional elements of other conflicts, some other regional will maintain that stability with some other form of elements of such as what we have the trade agreements between ASEAN, UK, Australia, and some other form of agreement that will stabilize the region for pushing the effect of the US and the China tariff war. And whether it's going to be extended to another form of conflict, we have to really wait and see. But this is something that we have to be careful in looking into what are the socio-economic devaluation that happen if this conflict extended.
Yes, before we move away from China-US relations, Ross, just to finish, my final question with you. You, of course, are joining us from Taipei. Positive rhetoric coming from this meeting from Marco Rubio, positive comments coming from Donald Trump around President Xi. Do you think that the Taiwan tensions have a risk of derailing this positive momentum between China and the US?
Well, the tensions over Taiwan are an important factor in U.S.-China relations, and it never goes away. It goes up and down. For example, when then House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August of 2022, tensions spiked, especially because China responded with very large-scale military exercises. You could be assured that the Trump administration is going to approve very large weapon sales to Taiwan sometime in the coming months or years, and that's also going to cause tensions to increase. So these tensions will not go away. They will come back despite periodic nice things that President Trump might say about Xi Jinping or that Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, might say about working with the U.S.
Yes, Ross, you will be staying with us. I want to thank Dr. Noor Nawandi for joining us and discussing those relations. We are going to